DJ PK and Dustin Smith joins us, founder of QB Elite and Spanish Fork High School's football coach. Dustin, welcome back to the show.
Hey, guys. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Obviously, the world of college football has gotten super entertaining here in the offseason with the coaching carousel touching down, Kyle Whittingham to Michigan, Morgan Scalley, tons of assistant coaches moving, dominoes falling at other schools. I'm curious in all that's been written and said, as someone who has some access to some of the scuttlebutt and has probably heard stuff from some pretty good sources. Do you think any part of this story in your mind has been missed or hasn't been told, I don't know, loudly enough?
What I think is the most fascinating thing to me, I mentioned somebody or heard somebody on your show, might have been you, David, a couple of days ago bring it up. It's the trickle-down effect of this and how it really has affected so many other schools. And you know, I think that the part that I personally believe is being maybe not talked about as much is the loss. In fact, I think PK touched on it in your last segment. I caught the last part of that, and that is the loss of Coach Harding from Utah. I think is something that in all of the movement and all of the things that have happened and so much talk on the head coaches and offensive coordinators and things, that offensive line coach it's so important. And Coach Harding, in the 2024 fall, I had the top recruit in the state. He was the Gatorade Player of the Year down at Spanish Fork High School, and he was an offensive lineman. And he had committed to Utah and then decommitted and went to USC. So I was able to meet with Coach Harding as well as with most of the head coaches and offensive line coaches around the country. They were all after this kid. And Coach Harding is a heck of a coach and a heck of a recruiter. And, you know, I know that Jordan Gross is I assume he's a good coach. I can't say I know that. I know he's a good football player. But that is going to be something that Utah, I think, is going to see right out of the gate is, will the offensive line do what they've done and be as effective as they've been when they've got a new scheme and a new personality, and can they keep that momentum up front? Because without offensive linemen, the quarterback play, the running game, passing game, none of it really matters if you don't have a solid offensive line. So he's the one that I think, you know, he's a heck of a coach that I think Utah is going to really miss.
When someone makes it out of a community, that person then becomes a legend in that community, right? If it's a small town or a smaller player or whatever, and goes on and plays in the big leagues, the NFL, NBA, he becomes sort of a hero for that community that he left. Like Mike Weir being a golfer from Canada. The guy's a hero in the entire country. He won the Masters. And where I'm going with this is one of your own, a high school coach, goes from high school to college head coach, Eric Kerr at Corner Canyon to obviously Weber State. Now he needs to start recruiting high school kids. Obviously, you wanted to beat him if you ever played him. There's no question about that. And there might have been some jealousy with all the winning. But is now he the standard for high school coaches? And then when he goes to recruit in the state, he's going to get a lot of love because he's, like I say, one of your own.
Yeah. And the thing about Eric is I don't think anybody in the state has anything but just happiness and excitement for him and his success. And no, I never wanted to play Corner Canyon. I didn't want to. That wouldn't have gone well. But he is a great coach. I've known him for a lot of years, going back to when he was at Jordan, and he is going to have, I think, he's going to be a great recruiter. And he just added Isaac Asiata, I know, as his offensive line coach. I coached Isaac in high school. I've known him since he was 14. Another kid who's going to relate really well with the boys in Utah. Eric's going to do a great job up at Weber State. I think coaches respect him. So when he comes into the school and wants to talk to kids, he gets it, and I think he's going to be able to pick up on a lot of these Utah kids that are getting missed nowadays because of how hard it is to be a high school kid and to be recruited to, you know, a big Division I school. The BYU and Utah, even Utah State, those schools, they really don't pay a whole lot of attention to the high schools now. I mean, they do, but it's third or fourth in the pecking order when they're looking for a kid. There's so many other kids they can they can go to before a high school kid, which means there's going to be kids who may have been a BYU or Utah State caliber kid, 10 years ago, who's going to be missed, and he's going to have to go to a smaller school and show it there and then leave. The real test for Eric, for all these schools at, the Utah Tech and SUU is building a program when you know that if you find that kid who's maybe the diamond in the rough or that kid that everybody missed on, and you develop him and he turns into be a good player, that he's going to be gone. So you're never going to – I don't know how you're ever going to really – develop a program when the kids you're really relying on to win are constantly going to be jumping to, can they get to a bigger school and make some money? So, but we'll see. He's going to do great up there, though. He's a great coach.
Can those schools help themselves by getting the kids in the portal who haven't landed? We hear about all the kids stranded there. There must be some kids there who could play at the Big Sky level, because whatever these schools are going through, Montana State are going through it. People are getting recruited off the Dakota rosters, whether it's North Dakota State, South Dakota State, whoever. They're all going through it.
Yeah, and the programs who can do that, the programs who can do that and who can find those high school kids who were the caliber of, like I said earlier, maybe a BYU or a Utah 10 years ago. If you're not a 4-star, 5-star type kid now, if you're not ready to play as a freshman, then you're really not of interest, to these guys. They need a guy that can play now, or they'll just go find a guy in a portal that's ready. So those guys that, 10 years ago you might have brought in and redshirted him and let him develop a little bit, they're going to have to go and try it out at a lower school. And so if those kids can maybe improve faster, and they can hit it in the portal with some of those guys that you mentioned that maybe aren't. Look at a McKay Hillstead type kid, for example. Now, he just, I believe, committed back to Utah State.
Right.
But McKay is one of those kids who's bounced around, who probably, if he had ended up at Bronson Barron did that down at SUU. He went out, he was at Weber State. He went out to Western Kentucky, didn't work, came back, landed at SUU and had a really good year. And I think McKay would have a really good year if he was at a Weber State or a Utah Tech or something. But I'm super happy for him at Utah State and hope he can thrive there. But there's kids like that are out there, and they're going to be at high demand. And Eric will do a great job, I think, at identifying those, because he knows who those kids are. He's coached those kids before, and there's so much talent just in Utah. If he'll just focus on the Utah kids, which I know he will, you can build a really good program around the Utah high school athletes who aren't going to the big-time college because of the difficulty in competing with the portal.
In terms of being recruiters, what do you think BYU is losing when Jay Hill and Guilford left?
A lot. I don't know Guilford as well. I've just heard things about him. I know Jay Hill very well, and Jay Hill's he's as good as they come at recruiting, and not only football. His ability to situational football coaching is something that I talk a lot about when I'm talking with coaches and players, and that's the ability to make calls during a game. Every defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator in a classroom, on a whiteboard or watching film can sound brilliant, but what you do in the 10 seconds you have to make a decision on a 3rd and 6 and being able to anticipate the situation and what's this offensive coordinator going to do here? What does he like to do? And making the right call. And Jay has always had that ability to, it seems like he's kind of a one step ahead, or he thinks like an offensive coordinator, which makes him a good defensive coordinator. But he's so good with the boys. He's just got the personality. He's going to be perfect out there at Michigan. So I think that's going to be a tough one. I think that Papinga's he's similar. I don't know him as well as a coordinator, obviously, but he'll recruit fine. But I think that's going to be the BYU defensive identity, which is something they've done such a good job at building and establishing these last couple of years. It's a bummer that they may have that may slip a little bit. I hope it doesn't. And then in the case of Utah, they finally found what I thought was an offense that was going to fit the style of defense that they play. and some guys that I think if they'd have stayed there, what they were doing with all the motions and shifting and, the athletic quarterback play, and they were scoring points and not just relying on pounding the ball and playing defense. So losing Beck and Harding, both the defense at BYU and the offense at Utah, it's going to be a makeover that I think we're all very interested to see, and hopefully it doesn't take a step back. But I'm afraid it's going to take a lot of work to keep it at the level they finished at this year, because both teams were really clipping there at the end of the season.
What did you think of the fit of McGiven going and joining Morgan Scalley as an offensive coordinator?
I know that I talked to Bryson Barnes a little bit up at Utah State, and him having been at Utah and at Utah State, he really liked him, really liked him, and said that as a quarterback, he was the kind of guy that the quarterbacks will really like. He's hasn't had the big name as some of the guys out there in the country have, that I think Utah probably could have gone after. So I think Morgan is establishing very quickly that he wants guys that he knows and trusts, and he's not afraid to just keep it here local, and guys who have been around, and maybe guys who aren't really looking to move. He wants a guy that wants to be at Utah, which I think, Kevin or Coach McGiven is. I think offensively as a coach, what he was doing up there at Utah State, he had a similar style of quarterback in that he had a guy who could also run the ball, which, obviously Utah's QBs can do. So I think that's a good fit. I think he'll be fine at Utah. I actually think that he'll do a good job. Will they be able to get going early and be effective early in the year? Or is it going to take a whole season for guys to figure it out? Because if that's the case, then I get a little concerned specifically with Ficklin. Is he going to stick around? I was a little surprised that both of those guys stayed. I thought that, especially Ficklin, that after what he did, that he might say, hey, I don't want to just be a wildcat guy, that he might have jumped. So, that'll be the big test for Coach McGiven, is can he keep both those QBs happy and so that they're both around in a year from now.
Now that his freshman season is over, I'm speaking, of course, of Bachmeier. I wanted your evaluation in terms of, I wouldn't say maybe, certainly you were impressed, but what was your level of surprise that he was able to come in as a first-year kid and do what he did?
I was really surprised that he was able to do what he did. I mean, to come in as a freshman, and I think what we maybe sometimes forget is that he wasn't there for spring ball either. So
right.
To come in and to miss spring ball, and then to come in and to grasp the offense, and then it's one thing to grasp it, it's another thing to then be able to have it translate over to the field when your last real competition came with high school players, and he was playing good teams right away, and he had to be able to adjust and adapt quickly. And most freshmen, they'll have a handful of games where, they get cooked because they're just not mentally ready, even, physically, whatever. It's the mental and emotional side that they're just not ready to handle. And especially being a quarterback at BYU and following the quarterbacks that he followed out of BYU, there was a lot of pressure, and he came in and seemed like he just fit right in. And so, I don't think that Coach Roderick, he simplified the offense, I'm guessing, and I think that it was obvious in some games that Bear was I think he might have been told who to look for and where to go with the ball, and they were trying to simplify it, which I think was smart, and it worked. They did just fine offensively. I think, you hear sometimes people talk about, well, sophomore slump or something like that. He's not going to be worse next September. He's only going to be a better quarterback. Physically, he's going to be better. He's going to have more control he's going to feel more comfortable, more control of the offense. They're actually going to be able to open up the offense more and add more to it. So now whether or not he plays as well or plays better, there's so many variables that go into that at the quarterback position, because you can improve and be better as a quarterback. But, as we all know, football is the ultimate team sport. And I think oftentimes quarterbacks he didn't do as well as he did last year. He took a step back, and, he didn't really take a step back. He's just as good or better, but the receivers or the offensive line, there's other things that took a step back, and then that reflects oftentimes poorly on the quarterback play. So, if their run game can stay solid, they've got to fix a couple. They're going to miss a couple guys out at receiver. If they can fix those quickly, I think he'll have an even better year because Coach Roderick's going to be able to add more to the offense, and Bear can only be more comfortable. But what he did this year, having missed spring ball, what he did performance-wise on the field, but also just as a leader, he seemed very calm out there. He didn't get it too up or too down. He handled the media well. So I think BYU fans have, a lot to be excited about with him coming back. It's the other positions that, and as we talked about, the defense that I think is the areas that, really need to be focused on. Bear will be fine.
Dustin Smith joining us, founder of QB Elite and Spanish Fork High School football coach. As football has evolved here, when I got here, high school games used to go about 2 hours and 10 minutes. They ran the ball. There were guys getting recruited, but they weren't quarterbacks. And that has changed, and games now go 2 hours and 45 minutes, and there seem to be pretty good high school quarterbacks everywhere and a few guys who can advance on and play college football. Where does it stand right now as far as the high school quarterback scene in the state of Utah and potential college players, maybe for one of the local schools we mentioned here?
Well, I got to be careful because the ego in me, guys that have been around quarterbacks and developing quarterbacks and focusing on quarterbacks. I think the guys like me in Utah, I want to yell as loud as I can to everybody that the best quarterbacks in the country are here in Utah, and I'm so dang proud of the quarterbacks here and the development they've had and how hard they've worked, because there were so many that were missed on, I think, years ago. And there were a handful of us out there that were saying, hey, you got to come and look at these QBs. I remember Ty Detmer, this was probably, 8 years ago. We did a camp, and Jaron Hall was, I think, a sophomore, junior. Zach Wilson was right in that age. There were a couple other guys that were right there that were young. And I remember him saying that there were kids at that camp that had they been out in Texas, he said these kids would have had looks. They would have had offers by now. And he was impressed. And he, coming from Texas, he was impressed with the talent of the kids in Utah. And I think now, because of the success of some of these quarterbacks who have gone, obviously the group that's come out of Corner Canyon the last couple of years, but there's been some other ones. I think Maddox Madsen going up and doing well at Boise State, and we've obviously what Bryson Barnes did, having been a kid from a small school that no one really knew about, and playing well in the Rose Bowl and different things. I think we've shown that there is good quarterback play here, and coaches know it. I think that around the country, Utah is a place now where you don't just come here to try to find big, defensive, offensive linemen and linebackers, but we actually have some skill players out here, and specifically quarterbacks and kids who work really hard to do it. So there are some good players coming up, and as you mentioned, from the Skyview High School, the northern part, all the way down to Desert Hills and far south, there are kids all the way up and down that are good players that I think can go and can benefit from going to a school like Weber and Utah Tech. And the question is, will they recruit those kids? Because I've said this forever. I still believe it to be true. I think there's too much that goes on. Maybe it's the sexy pick for a school to say that they got a kid from California. It sounds like you found some kid, right?
Right.
We found this. He's from Texas. Wow, he must be really good then. And where it's not if he's a local kid, but yet our local kids continue to show that they're good enough. And so, I do think with the coaching we have in Utah, I know Morgan Scalley knows that. I know Kalani knows that. They're not going to miss on a Utah kid. Will those second-tier schools miss? I think they will, because they want to show they can recruit out of the country. I hope they won't. They'll just stay locally. Morgan, by the way, man, Morgan Scalley, I've known him for 20 years, and I know I changed topics here, but Morgan, I don't think that Utah could have found, if they had looked everywhere in the country and had a chance to interview everybody in the country, I don't know if they could have found a guy, a better fit for the future University of Utah. He and Kalani, it kind of reminds me of the start of what I think will be the good old days with Ron McBride and Lavelle Edwards, and that healthy rivalry and the friendship and how kids just loved playing for both guys. Morgan and Kalani, what a heck of a place to be in in Utah college football now with the head coaches at all of the schools. It's the football is as good as it's ever been here, college wise and high school wise. It's awesome to see.
So Dustin, now the Corner Canyon's out, you want to handicap 6A football for us? No, well, they're not out. I should say they're out now that their coach is out. I mean, who's to say, right?
Yeah. Look, 6A football when I say 6A football, there's about 4 schools.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's 4 schools in 6A, and then there's 3 or 4 in 5A, and then everybody else is scrambling. But it's Corner Canyon, Sky Ridge, Lone Peak, Davis is always hanging around there. But it's primarily those schools, I think, and Lehigh is always going to be a good school. In the 5A ranks, it bounces around a little bit, but you never know because of how many kids bounce around and transfer now. So, that's the unfortunate part, I think, about high school football in Utah is the transfer game is out of control. And it really is hurting a lot of schools, and a lot of the smaller town schools are really paying the price for the way that kids bounce around in Utah. And it's not as crazy in other states as it is in Utah. And, everybody I know it's a sensitive topic for people but for a lot of schools in Utah, it's hard. And for the schools at the top, these kids who come in and they're always going to be there. They're always going to be tough. The Corner Canyon's always going to be at the top of that. They're the Mount Rushmore of players and offenses. And so it'll still be Sky Ridge, Lone Peak, Corner Canyon. I'd like to see Bingham get back in there. I like the way they used to play that just physical run over you football. And Davis, man, that Davis High School, they've been throwing the ball around really well. So you got to keep your eye out for them. But Corner Canyon, Sky Ridge, Lehigh, Lone Peak, those are your 6A teams. Pretty much 3 of the 4 will be in the semis every year. You can just book it.
Yep. Dustin, we appreciate the time as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Okay, Dustin Smith, founder of QB Elite and Spanish Fork High School head football coach. When we come back, everything you missed in this show, next. Slacker Radio Headlines brought to you by Trajan Wealth. Call Trajan Wealth today, your local trusted financial fiduciary. Call them at 801-210-6800 or visit their website at trajanwealth.com. We have talked football this morning with Kevin Graham, and Dustin just joined us here in the last segment talking high school and college football and recruiting. Dustin Smith from QB Elite. PK, all the football, really good playoff game last night. We talked about the NFL games coming up this weekend. I saw you mulling. I saw you have that pose. You were in deep thought. Were you thinking about a football game this weekend during the commercial break? Or maybe one of the quotes that was shared with us during the show? Yes, exactly, that face.
No, I was thinking about that breakfast burrito I'm going to have in 25 minutes, man. It's going to taste so sweet.
Little egg, little sausage, little jalapeno.
Actually, what I was thinking about is that, we would have a lot going on. This is a busy time of year, but this whole Utah and obviously trickling down to BYU has extended our college football coverage into the offseason in a manner that we have never seen. And in a sense, from a news story angle, I'm grateful for it because it's fun. It's exciting. It's good to have a juicy topic without having to manufacture any form of juiciness. It speaks for itself.
It does.
People, I'm sure you guys are getting it. I'm getting it all the time, wherever I may go to speak to people about this situation at Utah and then having the trickle down effect, as you phrased it, for BYU. And Dustin talked about that. Even out of state, even in Arizona, getting it. That's what they're interested in. Now they know who I am, the people I speak to, obviously, but they want to know it because Utah and BYU are such that certainly in our part of the country, they're brand names. I don't think you can argue that in terms of football. BYU and basketball is building a big-time brand name as we speak. But football, they're both already there. And maybe it doesn't resonate to other parts, but I don't spend a whole lot of time in other parts of the country. It's, it's Utah, it's Arizona, and maybe some California occasionally. And those spots, everybody knows about them and they're newsmakers. And this is, to them, it's a shocking move that Kyle Whittingham would do what he did. As I step back and look at it, I'm not really shocked how it played out. And here we are. And what's the effect? And now Mr. Scally has this opportunity to really just lay into his Utah roots and put a massive imprint that could put his name right there with everybody else. Now it's to be determined. Right now it's a blank canvas, obviously, and in the coming years he will put his imprint. Hopefully for him and for the Utes, it's for the better, and we'll see. And Jay Hill's already made a little bit of an impact, and maybe more than a little bit of an impact, but he has gone now, and now it's time for others. Everybody, I believe, this is something I've always believed in. If you work hard enough, and you can answer that, have I done what I'm capable, what the amount of work that I needed to put into it? I believe if you answer yes in whatever field, your time will come. And then what you do with it is exactly that. So for all these new fellas from Morgan on down, I'm excited for all of them because their time has come.
The one thing we didn't talk about with Dustin, with Gennaro Guilford going, Gennaro Guilford Jr. is at Skyridge High and is one of the top recruits in the state. So as much as we've seen this Michigan story play out, until we get to recruiting and we see where these and we have some 4-star kids in this state, but we've seen 3-star kids have a huge impact. I wonder where they're going to land now. And you've asked, I remember you asking Bronco about this, because of the way Utah and BYU recruit now with the portal, should Utah State focus? Can they get more of the 3-star kids in-state products to go to Utah State than ever before? And he was talking about just doubling down on local recruiting. It'd be super interesting to see how this works out with the next full recruiting class, because there's way too many guys who've coached in Utah and Michigan now to think that they aren't going to be back here.
Yeah, and Bronco had done that a little bit when he was at Virginia, getting some attention for guys out here. I think everybody should evaluate all the opportunities that they have, and then they, along with them, their families and their parents, probably, most likely, hopefully, make the best decision. And for Bronco Mendenhall, this is an exciting time to be a Utah State Aggie, I believe, too, because you're going into a new situation, but it's also familiar. It's not brand new in a sense that, a lot of your programs that you've been competing with are going with you into the Pac-12. I think it's a step up. And with that in mind, see where the dust settles. We talked about with Oklahoma and Texas leaving who was going to be the king in the Big 12. Well, now it looks like it's going to be Texas Tech, and pretty much everybody in my mind is fighting for number 2. You just can't beat the amount of money. Maybe you might be able to equal it, and that's going to be hard. I don't even know if you can do that, but you're not going to beat them in terms of the finances, and that's always has a loud voice. And now, who's it going to be in this new version of the Pac-12 when we get to the 26th season? You all in a sense, have the same opportunity to grab hold of that conference. And I think it's going to be a pretty good conference. And we're all familiar with all the schools. So certainly on our show and the shows all on our station, we're going to be focusing. And Utah State really has a chance to grab a slice of the pie and more attention than that they've grabbed traditionally. And we'll see what they do and how many locals they have to be on their team. We already know Hillstead's going to go back, and we'll see if he can regain. He looked like obviously he had way more playing time at Utah State than he did the last couple of years at BYU. And what can he do there? So, yeah, I'm intrigued and excited to see what's ahead for all of our teams, because even as things stay, there's a significant amount of change that creates the intrigue.
I did just read a story, and it wasn't by someone local, it was national, and they were talking about how at the Texas Tech, they led with Texas Tech, but they said Texas Tech and BYU are separating from the rest of the conference. And Kyle Whittingham told us how much money you have is going to determine the pecking order. And we don't get to know exact numbers. It's a little, and I've heard Mark Harlan talk about this. The biggest numbers get talked about. There isn't that much money. There's too much hype in the media. It doesn't reflect the reality. And you can see how that would happen. The biggest numbers and the most glamorous positions are going to get talked about. And, offensive and defensive linemen aren't getting paid like quarterbacks. And I get all that. But BYU, when they bring everybody back and run everybody back, I'm assuming the rest of the country has tampered with their guys the same way the rest of the country is tampering with any other program. And if they're holding on to their guys, maybe they got a little more money. Maybe that we will not be outbid quote resonates a little bit. Now, do I think they have Texas Tech cash? No. But do they have better cash than anybody else in the league? Because everybody else in the league seems to be losing guys.
Well, I think that Texas Tech has separated itself. There's no question about that. I don't think, though, if you want to put BYU at number 2, and they're fresh in our minds because they finished number 2 this year, I understand that. But I think the gap from 1 to 2 is pretty large, but I don't think the gap from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 is that large. I think that if you want to put BYU there, fine, no problem. But I think there's 3 or 4 others that have that opportunity to seize that. I don't think it's as much of a stronghold as Cody Campbell and the cash that he has just decided, I am going to throw at Texas Tech. I don't care what you think. This is the way it's going to be.
I can buy that. I can buy Texas Tech in the top spot by a wide margin. And we don't know, and it's early off very little information, and maybe even in a week we'll think something different. But right now, I'm thinking if you watched L.J. Martin run the ball, there ought to be a lot of schools trying to pry him away from BYU. And if you watch John Henry Daly try to sack a quarterback, there ought to be a lot of schools trying to pry him away from Utah. Well, one guy's staying put and one guy's on the move. Now, some of these guys are in the portal for Utah. We've seen guys go in the portal and still go back to the school. So I don't know how it's going to play out. And then maybe I'll have a different opinion in a week. But a lot of guys in the portal, it looks like they're leaning towards leaving. And if one school loses 3 or 4 potential NFL guys, or certainly all conference guys, and another school doesn't, it looks to me like somebody's got the upper hand then. But we can get a little more info in before we put that in concrete.
And see, but that's where I think now a coaching and development are even going to be more important, because there's plenty of guys who want a shot. There's a kid, I just read the story last night, a kid out of Delaware, which usually has a good football program, right?
Yeah.
A little squatty running back. He apparently told the coaches at ASU, hey, I'm going to come to Phoenix. I don't care about the money. He wants to be the next Scadaboo. And he told the guys, I won't come to the airport. And if you don't even want me to come on campus, just come to the airport and talk to me, because I want you to hear what I have to say. And so they said, okay. And now, I don't know, they just came to the airport and I probably took him to campus.
Right.
And he committed, right? I have no idea if this kid is good, right? We'll find out here next season, right? And the point I'm making, though, is there's plenty of kids who want to move up.
Yes.
And now if you can identify, and it's not just identify the high school kids, it's identify the lower level kids.
Yes.
And I can argue that identify and develop thing that Kyle was so good at is now more important than ever, because you can't compete with a Texas Tech financially. It's just not going to happen. So you need to coach them up and develop them even more than you did before. And so we'll see how that goes. Who is really good at identifying and developing and getting kids to be in the position to succeed? And we see that's especially with football. I think basketball, talent is talent, and you got to have it, right? And the star system in basketball is far more true and realistic as far as who's really good. But football, it's all over the place. Malachi Nelson, the #1 high school recruit, quarterback a few years back, he's going to make his 4th transfer here. It's not happening. It's not working. And he was identified. And I do think what Dustin Smith said, well, if some of these kids were in Texas, it's like whoever the quarterback is at Mater Dei, boy, he must be really good, right? Because he's the quarterback at Mater Dei, and they've had a slew of guys go in and do great things. So I understand all that, but they're still missing. And can you find dudes and get them to where they need to be? That's going to be the fascinating thing. Money talks, but there are other ways. You're not going to compete financially with Texas Tech, but can you do other things to compete with them?
Dustin Smith, founder of QB Elite, Spanish Fork High School football coach, talked football with us earlier today. Kevin Graham, also on football, and David Locke, radio voice of the Jazz. All those interviews available wherever you get your podcasts. Listen to them at your convenience this weekend if you missed them. We're back with your feedback next. Stay with us. Time for your feedback. Utah Star defensive end John Henry Daly, committing to Michigan. What's your mood, Ute fans, about all of this? It's a range from blame the media, Ross stirring the pot.
Who's stirring the pot?
Me for posting that on Twitter. You for posting that on Facebook. Us.
No, that pot has stirred itself over and over again.
Well, I think I see that in the other In the other comments here, you got super supportive. Pete, get paid, JHD. Good for him. Christian, good for him. I hope he excels. G-Pa Robbie at Utah Ute 007. I'm numb to all the noise now. Life marches on. You know, I get that a little bit. On December 26th, when Kyle announces he's going to, Michigan and the whole news breaks. Wow. Man, you're trying to get on with your life. It's January 9th now. We do it for a living, so we just keep. But I get other people juggling other things. Like, all right, I got it. What's next? Let's move on.
Well, yeah, we're 9 months away from playing a ball game, too. I understand that. And every kid who goes in the transfer portal, I wish them well as long as they're not leaving ASU.
Evan says, I'd be annoyed if he was leaving for somewhere else, but I understand that he still wants to play for Kyle Whittingham. Evan, very understanding.
Well, that will be his third school, so.
Yep, started BYU, right? BYU, Utah, Michigan.
Yeah, I've said if a kid transfers and then transfers again, how can you be surprised? Because he already did it once.
Yeah.
He's already shown you that he's willing. Now, obviously, a local kid going from BYU to Utah or vice versa isn't that big of a move geographically. You're not really changing the rest of your life. But going to Michigan is a big deal. And maybe he has established a relationship with Whittingham and feels like this is something that I need to do. And also maybe the cash is better. And so be it, man. I just think that if I had an opportunity and I'm young and I don't have to worry about kids and uprooting them and everything that goes into it, and I have a chance to go to Michigan, wow. How do you say no to that?
Brendan says, it's out of my control. I won't lose any sleep over it.
Well, I don't know that I would be losing sleep anyway because it's just nothing but football. And for the rest of us as fans, keep it in perspective. What difference does it really make? And also, too, if a kid leaves, well, who do you replace him with? What do you have that is on the field that next coming season? It's the old Ben Olsen, Max Hall. Ben took off. Max Hall came in and won a ton of games. Nobody has won more, right? If Bachmeier were to stay all four, he probably would. But who knows if that's going to happen for a number of reasons. And, well, look at that. So it's not necessarily who you don't have, it's who you do have. And there's plenty of kids who know how to play this game. Locke always talks about how the NBA has more talent than ever. Well, I can argue football has more talent than ever.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, there's plenty of kids around here and who would give whatever to be able to play defensive line if their body types allow it to be at the University of Utah. So let's see what they come up with. And we will. We'll have 12 opportunities to see it next season.
I think Bill makes a strong point. Strong answer out of Bill here. He says, in reaction to the question, Utah star defensive end John Henry Daly commits to Michigan. What's your mood about all this? And he says, I don't really care anymore. Need to focus on the team we have now, not those who abandon it. Trust the process. Trust Scally. That's a pretty healthy attitude going forward and probably the only thing that will get the Utes in a good place, a place they want to be a year from now.
I mean, who's to say McGibbon doesn't come in here with whoever's the quarterbacks, if they stay, if they go, whatever, and light it up. And Jordan Gross, man, he was just coaching high school because, he had NFL money, blah, blah, blah. But now's the time. He's ready to go. And this guy isn't awesome. And I can go down the line from all the guys that they've brought into the program, right? So I would be far from thinking, oh my gosh, the sky has fallen. It's just an interesting story, one in which, in the next week or two, it'll calm down a little bit, and then it'll get bigger with spring ball, and then it'll calm down, and then we'll get to next season. And the way I look at it, and we were talking about this the other day in the office, man, we're going to be following Michigan unlike we've ever followed Michigan before.
100%. Absolutely.
It's going to be fun.
I think that the thing that Scotty said about McGibbon that really has me intrigued about the Utes is because I was asking Scotty, I'm like, how exactly did you do it? That often, and I know it's a different level of football, Mountain West, I get, but they are still, everybody's got the same problem, so it's pretty even, I think. And they were getting chunk plays. They were getting so many 15, 25, yard play, bigger than that. Like, how do they do it? And Scotty looked at me and said, yeah, the most amazing thing is they're doing is that offensive line is patchwork at best.
We saw the sack numbers, yeah.
Yeah, and he said, and they're still doing it. So, like, how did they do that? Because Dustin Smith had good points about rebuilding the O-line and the strength coach and all that. But McGivern kind of negotiated that a little bit last year. Now, he had a super experienced quarterback, but guess what? He's going to have a super experienced quarterback, so I'm intrigued.
We hope.
Yeah. So far, as we sit here today, who knows what tomorrow
Take
brings.
nothing for granted these days.
Yeah, right. That's the truth. All right, here's one thing you can take for granted. Jake and Ben right after the break. Stay with us.